I became interested in learning more about ADHD through my work as a camp counselor for 11-year-old Boy Scouts. Every week, I would notice 2 or 3 kids that had an unbelievable amount of energy and a very short attention span. In fact, during one week, there were boys in my class who, if I turned away from the group for 10 seconds, would literally be climbing a tree when I looked back. Since I plan on becoming a middle school teacher, as well as continuing to work with Scouts, I wanted to learn what I could do to help these kids get the most out of school and stay ahead. ADHD is the most commonly diagnosed psychiatric disorder in the US among children, with 11% of school-aged kids having been diagnosed at some point in their lives, according to the CDC. ADHD is twice as prevalent in boys as in girls, and the number of cases in general seems to be on the rise. In 2003, 7% of school-aged kids had been diagnosed with ADHD. In 2007, the number was 10%, and finally in 2011, the number was 11%. About half were taking some sort of medication for their ADHD. It's hard to quantify the prevalence worldwide since different countries have different standards of diagnosis for ADHD. However, according to an article in Psychiatry Online, about 5% of kids worldwide have ADHD. This number is much smaller than the 11% in the US. However, an article from the National Institutes of Health suggests that children's behavior is the same everywhere, and other countries simply have different names for the symptoms that we usually associate with ADHD. In this video, we'll be exploring what ADHD is, how it's diagnosed, what might cause it, and what secondary English teachers can do to support students with ADHD in their classrooms. ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. Symptoms include having a hard time focusing, being unable to control behavior, and being extremely active. Children with ADHD can show 1, 2, or all 3 of these symptoms. ADHD is a very persistent condition. 80% of people diagnosed as young kids still have it as adolescents, and in at least a third of cases it endures into adulthood. As with any mental disorder, there's no exact known cause for ADHD. However, many people have done studies that show correlations with social factors, geographic location, genetics, and environment. You'll notice from this chart that at 7%, kids who live with both parents are the least likely to be diagnosed with ADHD, followed by kids who live with a single parent at 9 and 11% for father and mother respectively. Kids who have neither parent living at home have a 15% chance of being diagnosed with ADHD. Unfortunately, this doesn't go with the 11% number from the CDC that we saw earlier. Each study will show us a different rate since it relies on different people to do the reporting who are using different criteria. This map from the CDC also shows that some states have a much higher prevalence of ADHD than others. Hawaii finds itself towards the low end of US rates at 9%. Nevada's rates have actually gone down since 2003, making it the lowest at 6%. Meanwhile, in Kentucky, 19% of school-age kids have been diagnosed with ADHD, making that state have the highest rate. There's a strong genetic component to ADHD. An article on Psych Central says that kids who have ADHD are 4 times as likely as those who don't to have relatives who have also been diagnosed. Some studies have also suggested that lead exposure and mothers smoking before birth have led to increased rates of ADHD development in children. Studies like this are by nature inconclusive, since it's so hard to isolate these factors. As we mentioned earlier, there are 3 characteristics of ADHD: inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. The most well-known symptom of ADHD is inattention, or getting distracted easily. This gives kids who have ADHD trouble finishing assignments and paying attention during lectures and discussions. Kids with ADHD often don't want to do schoolwork because it requires focusing for too long. Students with ADHD also might lose their school supplies or forget to turn in their homework. Hyperactivity means you might notice kids who have ADHD squirming or fidgeting in their seats when they're supposed to be sitting still at school. They might even get up and start walking around for no apparent reason. Hyperactivity can make it hard for kids to work or play quietly. Another way this can be seen is through excessive talking. Impulsivity might also look like impatience. Students who show impulsivity can answer a teacher's questions before they finish asking them, interrupt discussions or conversations, or have trouble waiting in line for their turn. We've seen that ADHD affects a large number of children both in the US and around the world, and if ignored, it can seriously harm their progress in school. While we haven't yet figured out what causes it, there is a lot we can do to help students with ADHD succeed. Doctors often give psychostimulants to kids who have ADHD. These have a calming or focusing effect. Medication helps about 90% of kids who take it, and most don't experience any side effects, nor does the medication make them high. In addition, many people get behavioral therapy with a psychologist or psychiatrist. In the classroom, however, the first thing you can do as a teacher is to make your lessons more engaging. This includes making sure they're relevant to students' lives, using visuals and hands-on activities whenever possible, and varying your tone when you talk. It's also important to be very clear when you give directions. Write them as well as saying them, and include how much time students will have to perform the task and who they can get help from. To refocus students who zone out, move closer or try just making eye contact. Chunk tasks or lessons into smaller segments. Check the student's work and give feedback at the end of each chunk. Along the same lines, you can rearrange the class schedule to break up the monotony of sitting for too long at one time. At the very least, take breaks regularly to have everyone stand up, stretch, and take a deep breath. Teachers can also reward students for good behavior by keeping track of how often they are on task when a random timer goes off. This strategy can actually be used for the whole class, leading up to a class-wide reward like a party.